My name is Elise Calloway. I'm 29 years old, and I work as a paralegal, which means I spend my days reading documents other people skim and noticing the one line that makes the whole thing fall apart. I am very good at my job. My family has never once asked me about it. This past Christmas, I walked into my parents' house carrying a pie and found a stranger sitting in my chair. Not a random chair, my chair. The one at my mother's right hand. The one I'd sat in every Christmas of my life. Her name was Brielle. She was 26, and 8 months earlier she had knocked on my mother's door, claiming to be the daughter my mother gave up for adoption at 19, long before she ever met my dad. My mother took one look at her and decided the universe had given her a second chance. My mother lifted her wine glass that night and said, in front of the whole family, "I want to make a toast to the daughter I lost, finally home where she belongs." Then she looked at me, standing in the doorway with my pie, and added, softer, like she was doing me a kindness, "Elise, honey, I hope tonight you can finally just accept your sister and stop being so cold about all this." What my mother didn't know was that there was a sealed envelope in the inside pocket of my coat. She didn't know that 3 weeks earlier, the family's estate attorney had quietly required something before anyone could be added to my grandmother's trust, and that the results of that something had landed in my inbox that very morning. She thought I'd come to make peace with my replacement. I'd come because the truth was already in the building, and not one person in that room had bothered to check. Before I tell you what happened when that envelope was opened, do me one small favor: hit like and subscribe. It helps the channel more than you know. And drop your city and the time where you're watching in the comments. I love seeing where you're all tuning in from. Let me take you back to the spring, to the day my replacement first knocked on the door. To understand how a stranger ended up in my chair, you have to understand the chair was never really mine to begin with. It was just on loan. I grew up the careful one, the quiet one, the one who got good grades nobody framed and a scholarship nobody mentioned at parties. My family measured worth in volume: who took up the most room, who told the best story, who needed the most help and therefore got the most attention. I was low maintenance, and in my family, low maintenance meant low priority. My mother, Diane, ran our family like a woman forever, trying to fill a hole she never named. My father, Tom, kept the peace by agreeing with whoever spoke last. And the center of it all was my grandmother, Nana Cora, my mother's mother, 84, sharp as a paring knife, sitting on a trust built from 40 years of running the only pharmacy in our town. When I was a kid, I assumed my mother just wasn't a warm person. It wasn't until I was an adult that I learned the shape of the whole. At 19, before my father, before any of us, my mother had a baby and placed her for adoption. She never talked about it. We learned the broad strokes only in fragments a sister my dad once mentioned, and then went pale and changed the subject. My mother carried that absence like a stone in her shoe for 30 years, and she never let any of us touch it. So when Brielle showed up that spring 26, soft-spoken, with a manila folder of adoption records and a story that fit the stone in my mother's shoe like it had been carved for it, my mother didn't ask questions. She didn't want to. She wanted it to be true so badly that wanting became the same as knowing. Within a month, Brielle had a key to the house. Within 2, the guest room, which had been my childhood room, was repainted in a color Brielle picked. My old things boxed into the garage. My mother started signing texts to her "Love, Mom" before she'd ever signed one that way to me. When I gently raised that maybe we should verify the story, just to be safe, my mother set down her coffee and said, to the room, "Elise has always struggled to share." Then she asked Brielle if she wanted to go look at wedding venues, because Brielle had mentioned a fiancé none of us had met. The venues got an afternoon. My question got a sigh. I have learned, over 29 years, to keep my needs small enough to carry quietly out the door. So I didn't fight for the room or the chair. I just started paying very close attention, because that's what I'm good at. Nana Cora was the only one who never bought it. I'd drive out to her place on Sundays. I was the grandchild who still did that, and we'd sit in her kitchen that smelled of cardamom and clove, because Nana, baked the same German cookies every week of her life, whether anyone came or not. She'd slide a plate across the table with her cool, dry hands and say what was on her mind, which was usually everything. "That girl's story has a seam in it," she told me one Sunday, the first month Brielle was around. "I can't find it yet. But I've sewn enough to know a hem that's been let out." She tapped the table. "Your mother lost something 30 years ago, and she'd give the rest of her life to have it back. People can smell that kind of hunger from a mile off, Elise, and some of them follow the smell." I told her not to be cynical. I told her maybe it was real, and wouldn't that be wonderful for Mom? Nana looked at me over her glasses. "Wonderful would be lovely, but wonderful gets verified, same as anything else." The number of people who've tried to get a hand into this family's pocket over the years would surprise you. Your grandfather kept a folder. She sipped her tea. "I keep a lawyer." She told me then, plainly, that the trust she'd built, the one her 4 grandchildren stood to share, required documented lineage before anyone new could be named a beneficiary. Her own rule, written in years ago, after watching her sister get fleeced by a man claiming to be a cousin. "Blood gets proved in this family," Nana said. "Not because I don't believe in love, because I've watched love get robbed." Then she reached into the drawer where she kept her recipe cards and took out a small folded note with a phone number on it. "If your mother won't keep her head, somebody has to. You're the careful one, Elise. You always have been. I'm asking you to be careful for all of us." She pressed the note into my hand. "Call Francis when it's time. You'll know when." I tucked the note in my wallet. I thought she was just being a stubborn old woman, tidying up her affairs. She wasn't. Over the next several months, I did what I do. I kept records. Not out of malice, out of habit. I'm a paralegal. Documentation is how I breathe. So into a folder on my laptop went the small things that didn't add up. Brielle said she'd grown up in Portland. In another conversation, she said her adoptive parents were from Tucson and she'd never left the Southwest. The adoption agency she named had, according to a 5-minute search, closed in 1989, 3 years before she said she was placed through it. The records in her manila folder were photocopies of photocopies, with the case numbers conveniently smudged. I didn't confront her. I just noted it, dated it, and saved it, the way I'd save anything that might matter later. The hardest entry to save came in October. I'd driven over to drop off Nana's prescription, since I was the one who handled Nana's pharmacy runs, the way I handled all the tedious things. Through the kitchen window, before I knocked, I heard my mother on the phone with my Aunt Lynn, in the easy voice people use for things they've said many times. "Oh, Elise is just jealous, honestly. She's used to being the only daughter and getting all of it. It's good for her to learn she's not the center of the universe." A pause. "No, she's fine. She doesn't really have much going on anyway. This gives her something to be dramatic about." Something to be dramatic about. 29 years of being the easy one, the careful one, the one who drove the Sunday runs and never asked for a thing, and the first time I asked one quiet question, I was jealous. I was dramatic. I had nothing going on. I drove the prescription out to Nana's instead and sat in her kitchen and didn't say why. She slid the cookie plate across the table and said, "You've got that look. The seam's showing now, isn't it?" I told her I was fine. She patted my hand with her cool, dry fingers. "I see you, child. I always have. Don't let them tell you the careful one is the small one. The careful one is the only reason any of this holds." If you've ever been the one who keeps the whole family running and gets called dramatic the first time you speak up, tell me in the comments. I read every single one. In November, my mother decided it was time to make Brielle official. She wanted Brielle added to Nana's trust as a full granddaughter and beneficiary, an equal share. She framed it as healing, as justice, as making up for 30 lost years. She scheduled a family meeting with Nana's estate attorney for the first week of January to sign the amendment, and she told everyone the holidays would be a celebration of our family finally being whole. That was when I finally called the number on the note in my wallet. Frances Okafor had been Nana Cora's attorney for 20 years. Late 50s, precise, the kind of calm that comes from having seen every variety of family fall apart. She remembered me before I finished my name. "Your grandmother told me you might call," she said. "Sit down, here's where things actually stand." She explained it the way I'd explain a contract to a nervous client, flat, exact, no room to argue. Nana's trust, by its own terms written years ago, did not permit adding any beneficiary claiming lineage without a verified relationship test from an accredited lab. Not a consumer ancestry kit, an AABB accredited grandparentage DNA test, legally admissible, chain of custody documented. "It's not optional, and it's not personal," Frances said. "It's a condition your grandmother put in herself. Anyone who wants to be added has to test, including Brielle, especially Brielle." "Does Brielle know?" I asked. "She will. I sent the requirement to your mother last week, as a formality before the January signing. Your grandmother provides a sample, the claimant provides a sample, the lab does the rest." Frances folded her hands. "Here's what you need to understand, Elise. Your mother thinks this is a rubber stamp. She's certain it'll confirm what she wants." So she agreed to it without a fight, and Brielle interestingly couldn't say no without raising the exact question she spent 8 months avoiding. A pause. The samples went to the lab the week before Thanksgiving. The results are due back in early January, before the signing. Standard turnaround. I sat with that. "And if they come back early?" Frances looked at me over her glasses, the same way Nana did. "Then they come back early. The lab sends the official report to the parties when it's ready. I don't control the calendar." "Neither do you." She slid a card across the desk. "All you control is whether you're in the room when it lands. Your grandmother was very clear that you should be." I didn't tell my mother any of it. Not what Nana had asked of me. Not what I'd been keeping in that folder for months. Frances advised against it, and I understood why, if I tipped my hand, my mother would find a reason to delay the test, to question the lab, to grind the whole thing down until I gave up just to stop being the villain. So I let them keep building. I let my mother text me the Christmas details in case you want to come. I let Brielle keep my chair. I drove out to Nana's the Sunday before Christmas. She'd already given her sample for the test, sitting patiently while a technician swabbed her cheek in her own kitchen, unbothered, like she was being measured for a dress. "I'm not nervous," she told me, sliding the cookie plate over. "I already know what the seam says. I just want it written down so your mother can't argue with paper." She studied me. "When it comes, and I think it'll come soon, those labs are faster than they say you're going to have a choice. You can ask Frances to hold it quietly till January, spare your mother a scene, or you can let it land where it lands." She patted my hand. "I won't tell you which. But I'll tell you this. You have spent your whole life sparing that woman scenes, and it hasn't bought you 1 inch of room at her table." On Christmas morning, the email came. Accredited Relationship Testing Laboratory. Alleged grandparent, grandchild. Cora Calloway claimant, Brielle Tate. I opened the PDF in my kitchen with my coffee going cold. The probability of relationship was listed at the bottom in a single line, the way the most important things always are. 0%. The alleged grandmother is excluded as a biological relative of the claimant. Brielle was not my mother's daughter. She was not Nana's granddaughter. She was not anything to us at all. I had the option to forward it to Frances with a note asking her to hold it until January. My cursor sat over the button for a long time. Then I thought about my chair, and the cookie plate, and Nana saying it hasn't bought you 1 inch. I printed the report, sealed it in an envelope, and put it in the inside pocket of my coat. Then I made a pie, because I'd said I would bring one, and I drove to my parents' house. The house was warm and loud and smelled like the holidays. Brielle was in my chair. My mother was glowing. My father was at the grill on the back porch, hiding the way he hides. My cousin Maya, 16, sat at the end of the table with her hood half up, watching everything, the way I used to. I set the pie down. My mother lifted her glass and made her toast to the daughter I lost, finally home, and then she looked at me and asked me, in front of everyone, to finally accept my sister and stop being so cold. I didn't raise my voice. I've learned that silence does more work than anything you can shout in a room full of people who are used to being agreed with. I'd love for tonight to be honest, I said. So before we toast, I think everyone should see something that came this morning. My mother's smile tightened. Elise, not tonight. Don't do this. I'm not doing anything. I took the envelope out of my coat. This is the lab report. The one Nana's trust requires before anyone gets added. The one Brielle agreed to take in November. It came back early. I set it on the table, sealed, in the center, next to the wine. I haven't opened it again since this morning, so nobody can say I changed a word. Mom, you've been certain for 8 months. You should be the one to open it. The room went very quiet. Brielle had gone still in my chair, her hand frozen around her own glass. This is ridiculous, my mother said, but her voice had lost its shine. We don't need a piece of paper to know family. Then opening it costs you nothing, I said. It was Nana Cora from the far end of the table who spoke. She'd been driven over by Aunt Lynn an hour earlier and had said almost nothing all evening, just watched with her paring knife eyes. Open it, Diane, she said. You wrote me off as a paranoid old woman for asking. Open the envelope and prove me wrong. I'd be glad to be wrong. My mother's hands were shaking when she picked it up. She looked at Brielle one quick, searching look, and something must have crossed Brielle's face, because my mother's own face changed before she even broke the seal. She read it. She read it twice. The way I'd read it that morning. 0%. Excluded. The glass came down from her hand to the table, slow, like all the air had gone out of her. It's wrong, she whispered. The lab made a mistake. These tests, It's an accredited lab, Diane. Frances Okafor said because Nana had asked her to come, and she'd been standing quietly by the kitchen door the whole time, the way she'd stood by mine. Chain of custody documented. Cora's sample, taken in my presence. There's no mistake. Brielle is not biologically related to this family in any degree. Every face turned to Brielle, in my chair, at my mother's right hand. And Brielle, who had a story for everything, opened her mouth and for the first time in 8 months, found she didn't have one. She left before dessert. There was a flurry, my mother grabbing her arm, demanding it be a mistake, Brielle stammering about a different agency, a mixed-up sample, a half-sibling discrepancy, and then she simply gathered her coat and her phone and walked out the front door into the cold, and we never saw her again. I learned the rest in pieces over the following weeks. There had been a fiancé, the one none of us met except he wasn't a fiancé. He was a man 2 states over who'd run a version of this before, with a different lonely family and a different stone in a different shoe. Frances passed what we had to someone who handles these things. The manila folder of smudged records turned out to be exactly the kind of evidence that matters when the people you've conned have a paralegal in the family who saved everything, dated, from the very first month. None of it brought back the 8 months, but it closed the door so it couldn't open again. It was Maya who came to me first, that same Christmas night, while my mother sat at the table not speaking and my father stood in the kitchen looking like a man who'd known longer than he'd said. My cousin slid down into the chair beside me, not Brielle's chair, the one next to it, and pulled her hood down for the first time all night. Her stories never matched, Maya said quietly. I noticed in the summer. She told me she had a dog named Cooper, and then in October she said she'd never had a pet because of allergies. Little stuff. I kept it in my phone, like the dates and everything. She looked at me, almost ashamed. I didn't say anything because everyone was so happy and I'm 16 and who listens to me, but I should have told you. You were the only one who'd have actually looked. I took her hand. You're telling me now, and you kept dates. I almost laughed. Maya, you might be the only other person in this family I trust with a folder. Can I? She hesitated. Can I still come to Nana's on Sundays sometimes? With you? I like the cookies, and I like that you actually answer when I talk. Every Sunday you want, I said. I mean that. If someone in your family quietly saw the truth before anyone else and was too unsure of their own voice to say it out loud, go easy on them and tell me about it in the comments. Those are the ones that stay with me. I didn't gloat. There's nothing to win when the prize is watching your mother realize the daughter she got back was never real, and that the one standing in front of her with the pie had been real the whole time, and overlooked the whole time, too. My mother didn't speak to me for 3 weeks. When she finally called, it wasn't an apology, not really. It was a small, cracked voice on the phone saying, "I wanted it to be true so badly that I stopped looking at you." Which is not the same as "I'm sorry," but from my mother, it was a country mile. I told her we could start there. Slowly, phone calls first, no promises about Christmas yet. She said that was fair, which she had never once said to me before. My father came by my apartment in January with no warning, stood in my doorway, and said he'd seen the seams too, months ago, and stayed quiet because my mother's happiness was a fragile thing, and he was a coward about fragile things. "You were the grown-up in a house full of people, pretending," he said. "I'm sorry it had to be you. It shouldn't always have to be you." He didn't make excuses after that. We're better than we were. Nana's trust got signed in January, after all minus one name, with the 4 real grandchildren intact, exactly as it had stood before a stranger ever knocked. Nana made cardamom cookies for the occasion and slid the plate across Francis Okafor's conference table like it was her own kitchen. "Blood gets proved in this family," she said, winking at me. "Not because we don't believe in love, because we've watched love get robbed." Maya comes to Nana's most Sundays now. She's learning the cookie recipe. She keeps her notes in her phone still, just out of habit, the way I keep mine in a folder, the way Nana kept hers in a drawer. 3 generations of careful women, it turns out, in one small kitchen that smells of clove. So here's what I want to say to you. If you're listening and you feel like the people who are supposed to see you only look right through you, your worth was never about how loudly you take up a room. The people who measure family by who needs the most and shouts the loudest are reading the wrong column entirely. And being the careful one, the quiet one, the one who notices is not the same as being the small one. Sometimes the careful one is the only reason the whole thing holds. A quiet verdict doesn't have to be loud to be final. That's my story. If it made you feel something, anger or relief, or maybe just a little less alone, then it did what I hoped it would. Here's my question for you. Have you ever been the only one in your family paying attention while everyone else believed what they wanted to? Tell me below. I read every single one. Subscribe if you haven't yet, and I'll see you in the next one.